There were 189 recommendations in the final report, the vast majority of which we would support, some of which already we have implemented and will continue to implement and monitor. In those recommendations of 189, 21 were applied to the Catholic Church and 28 to religious institutions. So it means that there's a lot more work to be done in looking at more carefully some of those which are beyond this province and beyond our ministries, and which the Church needs to look at. And so some of them will need to go to the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, which in turn will make recommendations to Rome, and we await to hear what they suggest and recommend. But the vast majority of the recommendations of the Royal Commission we support. I believe there are 5 main emphases. And these are emphases that we were reminded of during the Royal Commission and which we continue to need to be reminded of. Firstly, the seriousness of the issue. That people who have been sexually abused carry the burden and the pain and the trauma of that for many years and often into later life. Secondly, there was a failure of leadership, a failure to be accountable and transparent, and also the lack of professional advice for those who addressed and were asked to address these issues when they were first notified of them. Third is the issue of failure of culture, issues around formation, candidates, supervision, and above all, clericalism, this culture within the Church that allowed people to not be accountable or transparent, believing they did not need to be in such an area as this. The fourth is dealing with offenders. We have become much clearer as to processes and protocols, and the Royal Commission has helped us identify them and be clear about them, but also the penalties that follow from such criminal offences. But I think the fifth one is probably the most important one, that is responding to survivors, ensuring that we listen to them, we take them seriously, we believe in the stories they tell, we keep good records for many years, which we didn't do in the past, but above all, we accompany them into the future. And that commitment of accompaniment is a very important value that the Royal Commission has reminded us of. We have sought for some years to improve the capacity of the program across our province and the various ministries that we hold. So beyond employing a professional standards director some years ago and implementation of policies across our ministries, we've taken 2 important initiatives in the last few years, which is to be accredited through the Australian Childhood Foundation, which means they will accredit all our ministries within the province over a 3-year period so that we are benchmarked at good standards. But also we've asked and sought the advice of external professional people in this whole area who are not Jesuit, who can advise us as to best practice as well. So those 2 initiatives, along with the policies and practices we began to implement some years ago, give us confidence that we can further implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission.
The Australian Childhood Foundation Safeguarding Children program involves a number of overarching standards that the organisation, being us, has to commit to, and it's an audit-based program. So the Australian Childhood Foundation will come in and audit that we have everything that meets those standards, and it's a rolling audit. So every 3 years they'll come back and see that we're still meeting those standards.
This is one of the achievements, I think, of the Royal Commission. For organisations, their responses has been to look inwards to their own systems and policies and practices. To me, the most important focus ought to be on preventing abuse before it would otherwise occur. And it seems to me that requires a very different set of questions and a different way of thinking about the problem. So I think the most important things that organisations need to do by way of their policy and practice is to make sure that they have a very clear focus around what they might do to prevent children from being abused in the first place.
For me, I think not only just for the Australian Jesuits, but I think for everyone, is keeping child safety on the radar. My fear is that with the end of the Royal Commission, does it then, out of sight, out of mind? Does it go back to the back burner and everyone forgets about child safety? I think it's about keeping the conversation going and keeping it in the forefront of people's minds.
I think there are 3 things. We have to continue to look at our policies and practices. We have to make sure we are accountable and transparent in terms of implementing our policies and practices. Secondly, we also know that we've learned a lot in the experience of the Royal Commission in this province and other church ministries as well. And we want to share the learning of that across other Jesuit provinces, not just in Asia Pacific, but internationally. We are aware that people are looking to Australia to learn from this experience, and we want to share what we've learned and what others have learned for their good as well. There are a few things I'd like to finish with. I'd like to thank those who are members of our ministries and are members of the Catholic Church, and who support us in our life and work. I'd like to thank them for the journey they've travelled with us over the last few years. It's been a very difficult journey, been a very painful journey, but for many a courageous journey as we face these very difficult and delicate issues. I also want to thank survivors who have come forward and those who have accompanied them for their courage, for their honesty, and helping us to face the truth of who we are and which we wish to become. I also want to thank the Royal Commission and the Commissioners for their courage and for help moving us forward, but also a learning beyond our ministries, beyond the Church, to the wider Australian society. And that is my final hope. The wristband I wear reminds me every day we all have the right to feel safe. I would hope that in our families, our communities, our sporting clubs, and in the Church, we all have the right to feel safe, especially our young ones and children.